Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us all back here again for this conversation, and thank you, President Kellylade, for
Hello,
joining us.
good morning, everybody.
It is wonderful to be speaking to you again. You and I actually spoke on CNBC in Singapore last year at a tech conference, and back then when you were president of Estonia, we got a little bit of understanding about what your country does and what you've done under your tenure as president of Estonia for AI, for tech. So let's just start by giving our audience a bit of an overview, if you're not totally aware of just how digitally advanced Estonia is. What did you achieve with technology and specifically with AI as president of Estonia?
Well, when Estonia regained independence, then it didn't make that much sense to build up our industry anymore, because that was so yesterday. So we let our economy to choose where it wanted to go. We didn't prop up any industries, we didn't do any choices from government side. We left the economy to find its own way. And no wonder, it was 30 years ago. It found digital technologies, it found biotechnologies. So we do not have chip on our brain in Estonia, we just did good economic policy 30 years ago. And then we also did it together, public and private sector, which is very important, because why did Estonian digital ID become, well, passport online? The only reason is that not every company was using their own ID, government its own ID, but we created it universal. It seemed kind of rational, and we thought everybody will be doing so in 5 years' time. They didn't. But I mean, we're not responsible for that.
What did you learn in the process of implementing all of these systems and getting so much of the country invested in being digitized?
Well, Estonia was a poor country, and digital technology, to be frank, is much cheaper to use than build up government offices. And in addition, I mean, if you can do online banking, why on earth wouldn't you do online tax paying? Kind of no-brainer, we thought. And many have asked, what's their innovation in technology? Actually, there wasn't. I mean, tech was there, and it was Nordic technology, Nordic banks who proposed we could do it together. I don't know why they didn't propose up north, but in Estonia. But we realized that government efficiency depends similarly on technology like does private sector efficiency. And why you realize that? There is the Estonian innovation, because we do not split into public and private sector at all. We work also, well, we fluctuate between two sectors because our system does not penalize going from public-private and vice versa. There are no pension systems, nothing which will keep us from doing it. I mean, everything is freely movable. So we absolutely didn't realize public sector should do worse than private. And now it is kind of happens again and again. You know why? Because our people see this is the service level of private companies, and they demand the government to provide the same type of service level. For example, proactive services where AI comes in. I mean, they notice companies are analyzing their customer behavior and prompting them. They ask government similarly to analyze customer behavior and prompt, like I've had a baby. I'm entitled to universal child support. So you know I've had a baby because it has a place in Estonian digital registry. You know my bank account. You know also, I mean, where I live, all this data is already available for you. Why on earth do I have and apply for child support? Government should know itself.
So that raises questions, of course, about data security and data sharing, but you bring this unique insight to speaking from the public sector. I know it will be interesting to so many private sector people in this audience to understand that and how governments are willing to work with the public. We'll dive back into Estonia and AI shortly, but I just want to make a slight detour into geopolitics because we can't avoid it. You were president of Estonia, which has a very complex history with Russia, of course. We've got a very aggressive war being waged in Ukraine at the moment. Really unfortunate, of course, to talk about. But with all of this, do you find the conversations regarding technological advances in artificial intelligence, for example, is being sidelined at the moment necessarily to concentrate on the politics surrounding this war?
But technology is not sidelined in the real life of people. And I mean Ukrainian people this time, not Estonian people. Ukraine has a pretty good e-governance model, actually built, well, similarly to Estonian, modeling themselves on Estonia. And this system is adding hugely to the resilience of Ukrainian people. In the first months of the war, 5,000 companies were created in Ukrainian jurisdiction using Trambita, their system, out of the act of patriotism. They want to stay Ukrainian companies paying taxes in Ukraine. They can do so globally, wherever they are. Ukrainian children in Estonia, for example, and elsewhere, they can remain in Ukrainian school system through e-school. Probably their system had not reached 40 million people of Ukraine, but nevertheless it helps them, for example, to keep track on asset rights and all this, which otherwise you couldn't do. So technology is actually a resilience tool. It is, of course, with its own risks like everything, but first and foremost, it actually adds a totally new layer of resilience to countries like Ukraine. This is very valuable, and only on top of them come cyber risks, cyber conventional, directed against systems. Well, we all know them. All our institutions are constantly under all kind of pressure. Somebody's knocking at the door all the time. We simply have to fight it back, so I'm not worried about our capability of doing so. Well, of course, occasionally something also goes through. It's valid to analyze your systems as strong as they are, but what I'm really worried about the attacks on our minds, because I mean these hybrid risks are far more difficult to measure than is the cyber conventional risk.
It's really wonderful to hear that idea of technology as being a force for resilience through war. That's something I think I'll take away from this conversation. But coming on to that point you mentioned about cybersecurity risks generally regarding data and technology, once again springing to mind Russia as an aggressor state currently within Ukraine. And I want to pose this broader question to you. Can all countries and leaders be expected to responsibly incorporate AI into their governance models, into their societies, especially, can we say potentially the less democratic, the less peaceful, the less Western-aligned countries? Where do you get to when you start thinking about who holds the reins for AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all technologies, starting from axe, can be used in the right way to cut trees or in the wrong way to kill people. So, I mean, technology doesn't change that picture. We have a saying in Estonia that Stalin didn't have a digital governance model to send us to Gulag. He perfectly found us and was able to do so. So, indeed, but in democratic world, we expect our governments to set itself borders, like they do, I mean. Every government in analog life also has borders in what it does and what it doesn't do to people. For example, what are the rights of the police to stop and search? I mean, similarly, in digital sphere, democratic governments set themselves borders. For example, Estonian government has a very strong safety architecture. I am the only person who can aggregate my own data into one computer screen. Nobody else is able to do them. And those who have access to my data because of their job never have access to bigger part that is needed for their job. And in addition, everybody who accesses data in various government databases leaves their personal fingerprints in the file, so that if a doctor has been looking at my data, I know this doctor has been looking, and if I think it's not my doctor, I have the right to ask why, and state will prosecute if they had nothing doing. We have a funny story about that which clearly illustrates it. One Estonian doctor was very ill, and his colleagues wanted to help him, and they were all frantically seeking for clues in his medical history, because they basically all technically had access to it. And even if he recovered, and even if he said he doesn't want a case brought against his colleagues, it was brought against his colleagues, because they had no right to do that to his data. This is how Estonian government protects our data, so GDPR is piece of cake for Estonians.
You mentioned rights a number of times there, so I want to move the conversation that way and talk about rights fundamentally. How do we protect human rights, fundamental human rights in the development of AI? What kind of protections can we give to vulnerable communities?
Well, in Estonian system, the government cannot aggregate my data, draw conclusions based on my past behavior, and act, for example, preemptively. What you hear here is nothing limited or specific to technology or AI. Similarly, the government in analog world has no right to do this in a democratic country. What I want to say is, like, we don't create special legal space for nanotechnologies, very rarely for biotechnologies. I think only for, free parent children to allow, avoiding mitochondrial diseases. This is done, for example, in Great Britain. So basically, we don't need special regulation for digital. What is forbidden in analog should be similarly forbidden in digital. And actually, the legal space which we apply as good democracies applies similarly in digital. I mean, nothing changes. It's only, technology which changes. But the role managements, the rights, everything remains the same. And that's the trick to do it rightly, because otherwise we create an alternative universe to our analog life, which is not necessary.
So I think you've already answered my next question for me, but I want to pose it anyway. It's a simple one, but it's also a really complicated one. Do artificial intelligence systems deserve rights?
In my understanding, no. But there are moral issues surrounding, artificial intelligent beings, which actually may have strong influences in, our human behavior, because we have animistic instincts in us. For example, in Estonia, when we started to see delivery robots running around the town, which they do all the time in Tallinn, then people immediately had their animistic instincts out. They're cute. They wanted to treat them as human beings. They were running around on EU Council Digital Summit in Tallinn, and I could see prime ministers and presidents turning to the robots and asking them, come here, I want to take a picture with you. You see, people treat them, with their animistic instincts. Now, where the risk comes in is that if we are having AI persons who look relatively similar to animals or children or grown-ups, and we do not defend their rights similarly as we would defend our own or animals' rights, then people start behaving badly towards these AI organisms, and it may actually reflect back on how they behave among real kind of organisms which have bloodstream. You see, it is more psychological issue, but it is not a legal issue.
I'm glad you spoke about that animalistic side of it, because I know the EU and an agency within the EU and Estonia have done a lot of research into this legislation and this idea that it could be like an owner-animal situation. It sounds highly Orwellian. It would be interesting to know from the audience how much you agree with that. We'll hopefully fit in a question or two at the end. But I just want to move the conversation on a little bit to talk about the business and investment side of AI, because I know that's very much what you're interested in now, these days. But keeping with the theme of regulation, what have you noticed with regards to regulation and the way it interacts with growth or limits it? How do you get that balance right?
Yes, in Estonia we have noticed that our innovation is rather in creative legal space than anything else. For example, if you do not legislate in your traffic code very clearly, well, you say cars need to be driven. But if it doesn't say by a driver sitting in the car, we tend to take the position that it can be driven remotely, whereas many countries would say no, unless it says expressis verbis, remote driving is not allowed. So this is kind of how we read legislation. And then occasionally, of course, you have to create special legislation, for example, like platform working and these things. And we want to remain innovators in this legislative space. And therefore, we created Accelerator Estonia, which invites people globally to, access our call for good ideas, whatever it might be, in whichever AI or other technology range they might be. And government invests into them itself as well. You know why? Not because there is any shortage of money or we behave into dirigism, not at all. But if government has its own skin in this game, they probably will make it more easy and smoother to have a discussion with the parliament on a said technology to make sure it is accommodated by the legal space in Estonia. We've started it, 3 years ago, and we hope it keeps us on this cusp of innovative regulation or innovative reading of the regulation if you do not need new regulation. And this is something which we want to do, realizing that we are turning indeed into a tech creator country as well. We have 10 unicorns per 1 million, but above all, we have been for a long time quick followers, and we want to remain these really quickest followers. This is our strategy in making sure AI and all other technologies are accommodated in Estonian system.
It's inspiring stuff, and to see a country using that model and displaying it to the rest of the world. Before we open up to questions, I just want to ask you a more personal question. What are you up to now that you are no longer president of Estonia?
Pretty little change. There are no big speeches, but I was in Singapore with you, I'm here with you. This is very much similar. Talking to Western European people about Ukraine, about, I mean, why I believe that we should have economic sanctions, for example, even in place when there is end of the war but no regime change in Russia. What is the change of regime? Change of regime is that they own up to what they have done, prosecute those who are responsible for genocide, etc. I mean, this takes up, I would say, 30% of my time. And I do a little bit of startup investing, individually in energy startups in Estonia, because I know energy sector, but also through funds to other areas of startups. So because it is Estonian economic ecosystem now, agriculture and ICT are equal in their size. The only difference is ICT pays 6 times more salaries.
It's fascinating stuff, Kirsty. Thank you so much. I have promised some questions, so if we can get a microphone out to the audience and turn some lights on so we can see any raised hands. Questions for Kirsty Keliled, former President of Estonia.
The questions would be coming from
yes, I can see one hand at the front here. If we can get a microphone, thank you so much. And apologies if I didn't notice any others. It's quite dark here. I can just see a gentleman back there as well. So we will be coming to you. Thank you.
Hi, Kirsty. Very good talk. My question is regarding to the judicial and the enforcement side of things, which are two very important pillars of a society. How do you see that AI can play a role in the judicial side of things and in the law enforcement side of things, so that the events that we see in the world where there's a lot of unfair things happening, how we can reduce that? Do you have a take on that?
AI and law enforcement.
Or
yes, similarly, whichever technology you are using and at whichever technological level you are reaching, I mean, the rules remain exactly the same. It should never change. Actually, we should start training our children in the schools in being kind of compassionate human beings at whichever technological level, and forget about training them at technology itself. That is the important thing. So what is not nice to do to people in law enforcement, I mean, in a democratic nation, in analog world, it is similarly not allowed to do this in the digital world. So there is no difference, absolutely, whatsoever. This is very important. We treat, I mean, technology neutrally, our legislation. This is very important.
Thank you. We'll take another question. There was a lady at the front here. And then, sir, I can see you in the blue shirt. I'll come to you next. Please.
Hi, Kirsty. It's an honor to speak here. I would like to ask, if you are still in office, I'm curious to know what is the 1 or 2 problems that you wish you had more time to solve and that you think are still unresolved at this point?
Great question.
One of them actually is related to education system of Estonia. I want us to move from teaching to supported learning. You know why? Because when I asked my own son when he was 7 and we went to live in Estonia, we had been abroad, and I asked, are you very bored at English class? He said, yeah, I am. And then said, but we all are, because we all speak English. There is only 1 or 2 children who don't. And then I realized, and I asked him that, what do you want then, your teacher, to do? He said, well, none of us can write, so we need to learn to write, but we don't want to learn to write on sentences like, I have a dog, do you have a dog? Because I want to know how you write leprechaun. So you see, children have very varied demands. Their knowledge level is not anymore the function of their age, but the function of their age and interests. And it's not only in language training, it's also in math, astronomy, wherever you look. So you cannot teach a class full of 13-year-old children on the same curriculum anymore, which means you have to give them individual opportunity to develop and get feedback from technology. So this changes radically the teaching. But very important part in that teaching then is that since our life is so tech-centered, how on earth do these children learn to be compassionate human beings? So we have to now turn our attention in our curriculum very much to training them to remain compassionate human beings, which is good because we don't know which tech we need to teach them. It will be Stone Age what we're doing today. But we know at whichever tech level and whichever way the tech turns, we want them to be members of society, able to form a coherent society which supports each and everybody's dream and doesn't hurt anybody. And this is becoming more and more important in the schools. I hope I still have influence on our discussion and maybe also globally where our education should go.
I'm sure that influence is still out there. One final question we do have, if you raise your hand again, yes, sir, at the back there. Thank you. Sorry, but a bit further back, he has extended his arm quite heavily, so I do want to get to him.
Thank you. You mentioned before something like in the order of to building technology is cheaper than to build a building. And that resonated with me. I'm Venezuelan, I'm also Spaniard, and I live in Germany. What all of those three countries have in common is that they have, if you please, the excuse of building a building to grant access to people to the public services, right? So it's their right to have access. How did Estonia overcome the right to have access to that in terms of technology and people?
Yeah. Estonian digital state started when, of course, nobody had computers at home and mobile phones had not been developed. So we had computers only in schools, libraries, places like that. And we made sure that there is free access to each and every citizen of Estonia. And then we ran the Tiger Leap program. Tiger is an exotic animal, as you understand, in Estonia. So Tiger Leap program to train younger than elder people to learn technology. So state made an extra effort, together with private sector, by the way, who was also interested because they get cost savings if everybody is online. We made an extra effort to be inclusive, and this is, which is very important, unless governments do this kind of digital inclusivity. Nobody else can do digital inclusivity, which means that access to digital IDs nowadays has to be universal, cheap, and then access to system has to be such that, I mean, both government and private sector use the same system, because otherwise it doesn't become national standard, and then the government has to train the pockets in society where digitalization doesn't come easily. And you know what we noticed during the pandemics? Our elderly had less problem of loneliness, because while they had learned 20 years ago to pay taxes online and they all bank online, it had basically made them all Facebook compatible because they're simply not so afraid of online. So my mother has a very active Facebook account. She's more than 80. So there is positive side effect, but you have to do it from the government side, not with government technology, mind you. So, I mean, you leave technology to develop freely, but you, I mean, make sure that government checks that everybody is indeed in the game. And then it becomes actually a great equalizer, because, you know, mothers with small children can communicate with the government at 12 o'clock in the night if they so wish.
Kirsty Kelly-Lade, it's been an inclusive and fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Let's give a round of applause, please.
Thank you all. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on the stage.